In the last video, we looked at the different laws that were passed and the different taxes and the growing tensions between the colonists and the king. And the very last act that the king passed that really made the colonists crazy was the Townshend Act, the idea of taxing imports. And so the king saw the reaction, didn't want to deal with the anger. He thought he'd pass that so they wouldn't be angry if they reacted in anger. So he kind of backtracked, and he didn't want the colonists to think that they were in control. So he left the one tax with the Townshend Act, and that was the tax on tea. Now, the colonists were highly offended at that because the only company that was allowed to bring tea into the colonies was a company owned by the British Crown. So, their reaction to the Townshend Act and these teas coming into the port was very, very dramatic. In most of the port cities, colonists stopped unloading the tea. If you didn't unload it off the ship, then you didn't pay the tax on it. Nobody was buying it, no tax was paid. The king wasn't getting his money. They threatened ship captains bringing tea and merchants who tried to buy it. They were like, you know, we're going to get you if you support this. No tea was unloaded in New York and other ports. In Boston, the governor, and you have to understand that the governors in these royal colonies, that means they're colonies under direct authority of the king, the governors were appointed by the king. And the governor in Boston was like, no, I'm the king's servant, I'm the governor, you will unload the tea. And so when the ships began to arrive in Boston, the governor said, okay, he ordered them to be unloaded. So what was the colonists' reaction to that? In Boston, particularly, colonists were so angry they disguised themselves as Native Americans, went onto the ship. They threw 342 cases of tea into the harbor, ruining the tea. The crowd cheered as the raiders destroyed over 90,000 pounds of tea, which was thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that are now lost from the taxes. So what was the king's response? The king was furious. Parliament said, we're done. We're done, we're taking action, and we're tired of your protests, we're tired of your stuff, we are the authority, this is what we're going to do. So they passed what the colonists referred to were the intolerable acts, laws that they could not tolerate. So the first one was that the port of Boston was closed until the colonists paid for the tea. So that meant that in Boston, no supplies could come in and no supplies could go out to trade or sell. So Boston was literally surrounded, and pretty soon the supplies in Boston were going to be gone. Royal governor could ban all town meetings, so nobody had a right to meet, discuss, vote, anything about what the happenings were, after the Boston Massacre and these escalating issues. Well, people could not get together and discuss those. All British officers, like the ones in the Boston Massacre, they had their trial back in England. And so that really made the colonists angry because they knew that the whole idea of a fair trial, that the people in England would most likely side with the British officers. So there would be no justice. And a new quartering act came along that not only did you have to provide all these troops that the king was sending over to manage these colonies that were getting unmanageable, passed along the British troops to be, the new quartering act was now the British troops could go and take an unoccupied building. If you had a barn, if you had a warehouse, if you had a little room or a little building next to yours, the British could just come in there and take it. And so what was the response of the colonies now to the Intolerable Acts? First of all, the colonies supported Boston. They sent supplies up there and food and other things poured into Boston. We support you. We're going to take care of you. It doesn't matter if your port is closed and you can't get supplies the normal way. We will take care of you. The Committee of Correspondence, we talked about information, organized a meeting to discuss what they thought should be done next in sending this information out throughout the colonies. That meeting was called the First Continental Congress. And so now they're saying we have to really meet as a group and decide what is our response to the king. Now the king is ramping it up, his reaction to us. And we have to really figure out what we are going to do. And they decided to meet in Philadelphia. This took place in September and October 1774. And some of the things that were discussed there, and they discussed, did the king have the right to do that? Were their individual rights being taken away by the king? So here's a summary. Congress sent a letter to the king and demanded a repeal of the Intolerable Acts. They said no more. They said, we are independent in a sense. We have the right to govern ourselves and make the decisions what's best for us. And we have the right to decide the taxes for ourselves. It also called for each colony to begin to train militias. Now, a militia is not a professional army. The British government had a professional army. The militia would be volunteers. It could be a baker and a farmer or a lawyer or a doctor who would come together on their own time and provide most of their own resources, their own guns, bullets, etc., to train if, in case, they were called to fight the British troops. And there was a decision made that we would boycott. We will ensure the king doesn't get his money. We will boycott or not buy any British goods. And they said, depending on how the king responds to this, we will meet again in 1775. All right, so about 6 months later, they met in October, November. We will meet again and see what the king's response is, and then make our next move. So, what was, we will continue on with this